The space station was quiet, but not silent. There was always a low hum in the walls, the sound of the air systems keeping everyone alive. But when Vora walked through the metal corridors, even that steady hum seemed to fade. Her footsteps were heavy, each one making the floor plates groan a little. She was taller than any other woman on the station. And wider, too. When she passed, people looked, then quickly looked away. Some of them whispered, thinking she could not hear, but she heard every word. Too big, they said, not fit for breeding. Someone muttered Vora, kept walking, pretending the words slid off her like water, but they did not. They stuck, sharp and cold. Her people were strict about what made a female worthy. Small bodies, light frames, and quick movements. Those were the signs of health and value. Too large. And the body could not carry children safely, or so they believed. Vora had known from her first growth spurt that she was different by the time she was 16 cycles. Old, she was already taller than most males. The elders began to avoid her. The young males joked about her size. The females stayed in small groups, making sure she was never invited. It was as if her shadow alone could spoil their future. But Vora had learned to live with silence. She worked on the outer docks, loading cargo that smaller workers could not lift. The job was hard, but it kept her hands busy and her mind away from the stairs. Sometimes she looked out of the docking bay windows and imagined what it would be like to leave. To be far from the constant judgment, far from the eyes that weighed her worth every moment. She imagined new worlds where no one cared about the size of her body. But she knew dreams were cheap and travel was not. One evening she was called to the Hall of Elders. The summons came without warning. She walked through the long hallway, feeling every pair of eyes on her. The hall was high and cold, with long banners hanging from the ceiling. 10 elders sat in a half circle, their faces unreadable. The oldest one spoke first. Vora, daughter of Shira, you have reached the age of contribution, he said. Her stomach tightened. She knew this was the age when every female was expected to join the breeding program. But she also knew she would not be welcomed into it. We have decided, the elder continued, that you cannot serve our future. The words were sharp, like a blade sliding into her chest. You will leave this world effective tomorrow. Another elder said, there is no place for you. Here, for a moment, Vora could not speak. Her mind raced, but all she could do was stand still. Do you understand? The elder pressed. Yes, she said finally, her voice steady inside. Her heart was breaking. That night, she went to the small living quarters she called home. She took only a few things. A worn travel bag, some basic clothes, and a silver pendant shaped like a star. Her mother had given it to her when she was a child, saying, if you ever get lost, remember, you are still part of the sky. She had never understood what that meant, but now she held on to it tightly. Outside her door, the station lights dimmed to night mode. She could hear laughter in the distance. Life went on for everyone else, but for her, everything had already ended. The next morning, she walked to the docks with her head high. People stared, some in pity, some with relief. A transport ship waited, its engines already warm. She handed her travel chip to the officer at the ramp destination. He asked, without looking up, anywhere but here, she replied. He nodded and waved her aboard. The ship's corridors were narrow, but she had learned to walk sideways when needed. She found her small cabin and placed her bag on the bunk. As the engines roared to life, she looked out the small round window. The station grew smaller, its silver arms stretching into the darkness. Her home and her prison fading into the endless night. She touched the pendant at her neck. If there's no place for me, she whispered, I'll find one. The transport ship moved through the black sea of space. Stars slid past like cold sparks. Vora sat alone in the small cabin, the hum of the engines filling the silence, her bag lay by her feet, her hands holding the silver star pendant. She told herself she should feel free now. But the truth was heavy. She was not just leaving her home, she was leaving her name, her place. Her history. On the second day, the ship docked at a trade hub orbiting a red gas giant. The place was alive with movement, ships of every size docking, loading, and leaving again. The air smelled of oil, metal, and strange spices. Vora stepped out. Pulling her bag behind her, the hub was a place for merchants, wanderers, and those who had nowhere else to go. She knew she belonged to that last group now. She tried to find work on the docks, but the foreman, a short reptilian male, shook his head. "You're too big for the smaller cargo corridors," he said, her size always the reason. She wandered through the busy markets, passing stalls filled with alien food and glittering tools. Everywhere, she felt eyes on her, some curious, some wary. No one spoke to her except to sell something. That night, she rented a small metal room above a repair shop. The walls vibrated when large ships passed. She lay awake on the narrow bed. Listening to the station breathe, her thoughts returned again and again to the words of the council. No place for you. The days blurred together. She moved from hub to hub, taking whatever small jobs she could, carrying heavy loads, repairing damaged panels, cleaning storage bays no one else wanted to enter. She was paid little, just enough for food and a bed. Sometimes she ate in crowded canteens, but the chatter of strangers always reminded her she was alone. The pendant was the only piece of her old life she still carried. She wore it under her clothes, hidden but close to her skin. One evening, while unloading a supply crate on a mining station, she overheard two pilots talking. "There's pirate activity near the outer rim," one said, "targeting lone cargo ships." The other replied, "Vora didn't think much of it." She wasn't planning to travel that far, but the universe had other plans. Her next job was on a small cargo freighter heading toward the outer rim. The pay was slightly better, and the captain didn't ask too many questions. The first days of the trip were quiet. Vora worked in the cargo hold, securing containers and checking for leaks. The crew kept to themselves, though one young mechanic sometimes tried to make small jokes. It felt almost normal. Then came the attack. It started with the alarms, a high-pitched wail that made her skin prickle. Pirates! Someone shouted over the comms. The freighter shook as energy blasts hit the hull. Vora grabbed the nearest bulkhead to steady herself. The captain's voice came through the speakers, "All crew to escape pods." She ran through the narrow corridors, her shoulders scraping the walls. The ship groaned under the stress of repeated hits when she reached the escape bay. She saw the last pod ceiling shut. The mechanic looked back through the small window, his face pale. There was no time to open it again. The ship shuddered. Lights flickered, and Vora felt the air growing thinner. She turned and headed for the engineering bay. If she couldn't escape, maybe she could signal for help. She was halfway there when the hull tore open with a terrible screech. The air rushed out. Pulling everything toward the breach, Vora grabbed a support beam, the vacuum clawing at her body. Through the chaos, she saw them sleek black pirate ships circling like sharks. Her lungs burned, her vision dimmed. Then through the haze, a different shape appeared. Not a pirate ship, but something cleaner, faster, its hull marked with a blue and gold emblem. A voice came over the open channel, deep and steady. "This is Commander Elias of the Terran Patrol. Hold on, we're coming." Vora could barely think. Her grip was slipping. The last thing she saw before the darkness took her was a bright beam cutting through the wreckage. When she woke, she was lying on a narrow bed in a medical bay. Soft light glowed above her. The hum of the engines was steady, but different from any ship she had worked on. A man stood at the foot of the bed, human, tall for his kind, wearing a dark blue uniform. "You're safe now," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Do you remember what happened?" She tried. to speak, but her throat was dry. He handed her a small cup of water. As she drank, he studied her, not with fear or disgust, but with something else. Curiosity. "Name's Elias," he said. "You're lucky we were passing nearby, Vora." Touched the pendant at her neck. Still there, still safe. For the first time in many cycles, she felt something strange, the faint spark of hope. The medbay smelled faintly of metal and something clean. Vora sat on the edge of the bed, her feet almost touching the floor. The blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. Commander Elias stood by the door, his arms crossed, his eyes sharp. But not unkind, she was used to people staring. But his gaze was different. Not judgment, not pity, just focus. "You were lucky," he said again. "Pirates don't usually leave survivors." Vora tilted her head, her voice rough. "Why? Did you stop for me?" Elias raised an eyebrow. "Because you sent a distress signal." She frowned. "I didn't." He stepped closer. The light catching on the edges of his uniform. "Then someone on your ship did, and whoever it was, saved your life." The hum of the patrol ship felt steady under her feet, different from the rattling cargo ships she had known. She looked around. Everything was cleaner. Sleeker Elias handed her a folded uniform, plain gray, no markings. "You can wear this until we find somewhere safe to drop you off," he said. She hesitated. "And if I have nowhere safe?" He paused for a moment, then said, "Then we'll figure that out." Over the next few days, Vora stayed mostly in the med bay. Her body was strong, but the vacuum exposure had left her lungs raw. Sometimes she saw Elias in the corridors, always speaking to crew members, always moving with purpose. The crew kept stealing glances at her, some out of curiosity, others out of caution, but no one mocked her size. No one whispered cruel words within earshot. One afternoon, a young communications officer brought her a tray of food. The smells were different: warm bread, roasted vegetables, a bowl of thick soup. She tasted the bread first and was surprised by its sweetness. "You like it?" the officer asked, smiling nervously. "Yes," Vora said simply. It was the first meal she had enjoyed in a long time. Later that evening, she wandered to the observation deck. The deck was a wide glass dome at the top of the ship. The stars stretching out in every direction. Elias was there, leaning against the railing, looking at a cluster of glowing nebulae. "You're quiet," he said, without turning. "Talking has never done me much good," she replied. He glanced at her. "Talking to the wrong people? Maybe." They stood in silence for a moment, the stars shifting slowly beyond the glass. Vora finally asked, "Where is this ship going?" "We're on patrol between Terran colonies," Elias said, "watching for pirate activity." "And you found me by accident?" she said. "Maybe," he replied. "Or maybe we were supposed to." The next day, she asked if she could help with repairs. Elias agreed, and soon she was in the engine room, tightening panels and moving heavy coolant canisters with ease. The chief engineer, an older woman with silver hair, grinned. "You're stronger than my whole maintenance crew." Vora allowed herself a small smile. It felt good to be useful again that night. She returned to her cabin to find a small package. On the bed, inside was a datapad with basic navigation charts and a note in neat handwriting. "Learn the stars. They'll take you farther than fear ever will." Elias. She wasn't sure why the words hit her so hard, but she sat for a long time, tracing the lines on the charts with her finger. 3 days later, the patrol ship received an encrypted message. Elias called her to the briefing room on the large holoscreen. A familiar crest appeared, the mark of her people's council. Her stomach tightened. "They say they want to speak with you," Elias said, his tone cautious. She crossed her arms. "Why?" "They didn't say, but they insisted it was urgent." She stared at the glowing crest, old anger stirring in her chest. "I have nothing to say to them," she said. Elias nodded slowly. That's your choice. But they might need you." She laughed bitterly. "They didn't need me when I begged for a place." The message waited in the console, blinking softly. For hours, she avoided it, walking the corridors, keeping her hands busy. But late that night, she sat alone in the observation deck and finally pressed play. A council elder's face appeared, older than she remembered. "Vora, we face an enemy we cannot fight alone," the elder said. "Our numbers fall with every battle. Our future is in danger." The voice was calm, but the desperation was clear. "We ask you to return." And to serve, she closed the message, her jaw tight. They wanted her now, but only because they were desperate. Her thoughts swirled, anger mixing with a strange pull in her chest. She knew her people's ways, their rules, their cruelty. And yet, they were still her people when Elias found her in the observation deck. She didn't turn to face him. "They want me back." She said. "I heard," he replied. "I don't know if I can forgive them." She said quietly. "Then don't," Elias said. "Go back for yourself, not for them." She looked at him, his face calm, but his eyes steady on hers. "And if I go, will you come with me?" Without hesitation, he said, "Yes, in." That moment, Vora realized something she had never felt before. She was not alone anymore. The decision was made. They would return to her homeworld, not for the council, not for their rules, but for Vora's own truth. The patrol ship changed course, its engines burning a steady path through the stars. In the days that followed, something shifted between Vora and Elias. It was not sudden, not loud, but slow and quiet. Like a seed pushing through the soil, Elias made sure she had space, yet somehow was always nearby when she needed him. He didn't ask endless questions about her past, but he listened when she spoke. In the mess hall, he sat across from her, eating the same food the crew did, never acting as if rank made him untouchable. Sometimes, when the conversation drifted to light topics, she even caught herself laughing. It felt strange, like using a muscle that had long been forgotten one morning. Vora joined the maintenance crew without being asked. She lifted heavy engine casings, replaced coolant coils, and adjusted power lines that smaller crew members could barely reach. The chief engineer clapped her on the shoulder. "If you ever want a job after this, you've got it here." Vora nodded, a small smile on her lips. Elias passed by during a routine check, pausing just long enough to say, "Looks like you're already part of the crew." She didn't answer, but his words stayed with her for the rest of the shift. In the evenings, Elias sometimes invited her to the observation deck. They would stand under the wide dome of glass, looking at the rivers of stars. He told her stories of Earth, a blue and green world where oceans covered most of the surface. He described forests so dense the light barely touched the ground, and mountains so high their peaks were hidden in clouds. Vora listened, trying to imagine such a place. Her own homeworld had been mostly dry plains and harsh winds. She wondered what it would feel like to walk on soft green grass instead of steel floors. One night, while they stood in the observation deck, the ship passed close to a nebula glowing with colors she had never seen before. Elias leaned against the railing, his voice low. "It's called the Veil of Dawn." She tilted her head. "Why that name?" He smiled faintly, "Because when light passes through it, it looks like the sky waking up." They stood in silence for a while, the nebula's colors painting faint patterns across their skin. It was in moments like these that Vora felt a quiet warmth she couldn't name. But there was still a shadow between them, the message from her council. She hadn't told him the full truth about why they cast her out. Not just that she was too big for reproduction, but the way they had stripped her of her name in official records, as if she had never existed. One evening, she found herself speaking the words before she could stop them. "They erased me," she said quietly in the mess hall. Elias looked up from his plate. waiting. They took my name from the registry. They made it so that even if I came back, I would be a stranger." Elias's expression didn't change, but there was a hardness in his voice when he replied, "Then you'll walk in as Vora, not as what they made you." Her chest tightened, and she looked down at her food. He made it sound simple, even. Though she knew it wasn't, 3 days before they reached her homeworld. The patrol ship intercepted a distress call from a small cargo vessel. The crew moved quickly, and Vora joined them without hesitation. She carried heavy medkits to the docking bay and helped pull an injured crewman from the airlock. When the mission was over, Elias found her sitting on a storage crate, catching her breath. "You didn't have to help," he said. "I know," she replied, "but it felt right." He gave her a small nod, the kind that meant more than any words. That night Vora couldn't sleep. She wandered the quiet corridors until she found herself at the ship's training room. Elias was there, alone, practicing with a long staff-like weapon. He moved with precision, each strike clean and controlled. When he noticed her, he lowered the staff and stepped back. "Want to try?" he asked. She hesitated, then took the weapon. It felt light in her hands, almost too light. He showed her how to stand, how to keep her balance. They trained for nearly an hour, and for the first time, Vora realized her size could be an advantage. In more ways than lifting cargo, as they walked back through the dim halls. Elias spoke quietly. "When we reach your world, it won't be easy." "I know," she replied. "They might welcome you for the wrong reasons," he said. "But that doesn't have to matter." Vora looked at him, seeing the way the low light caught in his eyes. "Why are you doing this for me?" she asked. He didn't hesitate. "Because you deserve someone in your corner." For the rest of the journey, their conversations were lighter, but the connection was there. Growing stronger with each passing day, it was a fragile bond, but it felt real. And in the quiet moments, Vora began to think that maybe, just maybe, she could face what waited for her. The stars ahead began to change. Each day, the patrol ship moved closer to the edge of her home system. Vora felt the weight of the journey pressing on her, heavier than any cargo she had ever carried. The fragile piece she had found on Elias's ship was starting to crack. She knew that soon she would stand face to face with the people who had cast her out 2 days before arrival. Another message came from the council. This time, it was not a request, it was a demand on the holoscreen. The elder's voice was urgent. "Our enemies attack our outer settlements. We have lost many. We require every able female to help restore our numbers." The words were cold, spoken like an order to fix broken machinery. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what they had done to her. Vora stood with her arms crossed, her jaw tight. "I am not your resource," she said to the empty room after the message ended. Elias was waiting outside. "You heard it?" she asked. "I did," he replied, "and I also heard what they didn't say." She tilted her head, "Which is?" "That they don't care about you, only what you can give them." His voice was calm, but there was steel in it. For hours, she walked the narrow corridors of the ship, thinking, her mind pulled in 2 directions. One part of her wanted to turn away and never see her world again. The other part whispered of the plains where she was born. The sound of wind against the tall stone ridges, the smell of the dust after the rains. She told herself she owed them nothing, but the thought of her people dying gnawed at her. Even the cruel ones were still part of the place that had shaped her. That night she went to the observation deck. The glass dome above her showed the faint light of her home star. Still far in the distance, Elias joined her quietly, standing just close enough for her to feel his presence. "You've been quiet," he said. "I've been deciding," she replied. "And?" She looked at him, her voice low. "I'll go back." Elias nodded once, as if he had already known her answer. "I'll go with you," he said, without hesitation. "You don't have to. I'm not leaving you to face them alone," he said firmly. The next morning, she told the crew. Some looked surprised, others wary. The chief engineer gave her a silent nod of respect. The young communications officer brought her a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside was a set of tools polished until they shone, in case you need to fix something over there. The officer said shyly. Vora smiled. "Thank you." The final approach was slow. Her homeworld grew larger in the viewing screens. Wide bands of gold and brown plains, streaked with silver rivers that caught the light. Vora stood in the docking bay as the ship descended through the thin clouds. She could see the capital city ahead, the towers sharp against the horizon. Her heart beat faster. The last time she had stood here, she had been leaving in shame. Now she was returning with a human captain at her side. The ship landed on the main platform. A group of council guards waited at the edge, their armor glinting in the sunlight when Vora stepped out. Their eyes widened at the sight of her. Then they noticed Elias, and their expressions tightened. One guard stepped forward. "The council will see you now." Elias leaned close and whispered, "Remember, you're not here for them." The council chamber was just as she remembered. Cold stone walls, high banners swaying gently in the air. The elders sat in their half-circle, their eyes scanning her from head to toe. One of them spoke, Vora. "We are pleased you answered our call." She took a slow breath. "I answered for myself, not for you." A murmur passed through the room. The eldest leaned forward. "Then you understand the urgency. We must rebuild, and you will be part." Of that, Vora's voice was calm, but each word carried weight. "I will choose my own path. I will not be used." The tension in the chamber was sharp enough to cut. Some elders frowned. Others exchanged uneasy glances. Before anyone could speak again, the sound of shouting echoed from the hall outside. A young figure stumbled into the room, small, thin, clothes-torn. It was a child, no more than 8 cycles old. The child's eyes went wide when they saw Vora, and without thinking, they ran to her, clutching at her leg. "They destroyed my home," the child said between gasps. "I have no one." Vora knelt, placing a hand on the child's shoulder. She felt something she had never felt before, a fierce, protective pull deep in her chest. It was not about blood or breeding programs. It was about choice. Elias watched her quietly, understanding. Passing between them without a word, she looked up at the council, her voice steady. "If I am to help my people, it will be on my terms." The elders said nothing at first. Then the eldest finally spoke, his tone less certain than before. "We will discuss." Vora rose, keeping the child close. She knew the decision ahead was not just about her people, but about the life she wanted to build. And for the first time, she felt she might actually have the power to choose. The council chamber felt colder than before. Vora stood with the child close to her side, Elias just behind her. The elders whispered among themselves, their voices sharp but too low to hear. Outside, the sky over the capital was a pale gold. The sun sinking toward the horizon, something in the air felt tense. Vora had lived here long enough to know storms came fast on her homeworld, and not all storms were made of wind. The child's small hand clung to hers. Elias's eyes scanned the room, reading the way guards shifted near the doors. It was the same look he had before a fight. Finally, the eldest elder rose from his seat. "We will allow you to help in the way you see fit," he said. It was a small victory. But Vora knew it was not trust, it was desperation. Before she could reply, a sharp alarm rang through the city. It was not the high tone of a drill, it was the deep, rolling sound of a real attack. The guards froze, listening for confirmation. A voice shouted from the hall, "The enemy is here. They've broken through the outer defenses." The elders erupted in noise, some barking orders, others demanding reports. Vora's eyes met Elias's. He gave a quick nod. No words were needed. The three of them moved fast through the wide stone corridors, past rushing soldiers, down to the lower levels where the city's defensive lines were already forming. Outside the gates, dust clouds rose as enemy craft descended, their black holes splitting open to release armored soldiers. The sound of plasma fire echoed through the air. Vora had never been trained as a soldier, but her body knew strength. She grabbed a fallen guard's shield, heavy and broad, and stepped forward. Elias moved beside her, his rifle steady, his voice calm as he gave quick orders. To the defenders, hold the line here. Keep them from breaching the inner gate. The enemy soldiers advanced in tight formations, their weapons cutting bright lines through the air. Vora planted herself in front of the gate, raising the shield to block the incoming fire. Each hit sent a shock through her arms, but she did not move. Behind her, the child huddled close to the wall, eyes wide. "Stay there," Vora told them, her voice firm but gentle. A blast hit near her feet, shaking the ground. One of the enemy broke from the formation, charging at her with a blade. Vora swung the shield hard, the impact sending him crashing into the dust. The defenders around her began to notice her presence was like a wall they could rally behind. Elias covered her flank, taking down enemies that tried to get through the gaps. The battle raged in heat and noise. Every muscle in Vora's body burned, but she refused to step back. Then a massive enemy craft landed beyond the ridge. Its hatch opened and a figure stepped out, larger than the others, armor plated thick across his chest and shoulders. He carried a weapon like a long spear. Crackling with energy, the enemy line cheered at his arrival. Vora tightened her grip on the shield. Elias moved closer. "That's their commander," he said. "If we stop him, we can break their advance." She didn't wait for more, pushing forward. She charged through the dust and fire, slamming into enemy soldiers that tried to block her. The commander swung the spear, the energy sparking dangerously close to her face. She ducked under the strike, ramming the shield into his chest with all her weight. He staggered back, but didn't fall. Again, he swung, this time cutting deep into the edge of the shield. Her arms ached, her breath was ragged, but she kept moving. Elias's voice cut through the noise. "Left side now." Vora shifted just as Elias fired, his shot hitting the commander's exposed joint. The enemy stumbled, and Vora brought the shield down hard, knocking him to the ground. The line of soldiers behind him faltered. Some began to retreat, others firing wildly as they backed away. The defenders pressed forward, the sound of their voices growing stronger in minutes. The enemy began pulling back toward their craft. When the dust settled, Vora stood at the gate, her chest rising and falling, the shield scorched and cracked in her hands. The defenders stared at her, some in shock, others in awe. Elias walked up beside her, giving a small smile. "Told you they'd notice." The child ran to her, throwing small arms around her waist. "You're safe now," Vora said softly, holding them close. Later, in the council chamber, the elders spoke in a different tone. They no longer looked at her as a burden, but as the one who had stood between the city and destruction. Still, Vora said nothing. She didn't fight for their approval. She fought for the child clinging to her side, for the people in the gate, for herself outside. The sky was darkening, the first stars appearing above the plains. Elias stood with her on the steps of the council hall. "They'll never see you." "The same way again," he said. Vora looked out at the city, the distant fires slowly dying down. "Good," she said quietly, "because I'll never be the same again." The fires beyond the city walls had faded. The smell of smoke still lingered in the air, mixing with the sharp scent of scorched metal. Vora stood on the council steps, the cracked shield still in her hand. The child pressed against her side. The streets were quieter now, broken only by the distant sounds of repairs and the voices of those searching for missing friends. Elias stood beside her, silent but watchful. Neither of them needed words. The battle had been won, but the real change had only begun. Inside the council chamber, the elders spoke to one another in hushed voices when they finally addressed her. Their tone was no longer commanding. "Your strength saved this city." The eldest said, "You have done more for us than we deserved." Vora listened, but her face was calm. "I did not fight for you," she said evenly. "I fought for those who could not fight for themselves." The elders shifted uncomfortably, unused to hearing defiance spoken so clearly. "You may have whatever you ask," another elder said. Vora looked down at the child, whose wide eyes watched her every move. "I want her safe," Vora said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "She will live under my protection." There was a pause. Some of the elders exchanged looks, but none dared to object. "It will be done," the eldest said finally. Vora nodded once, then turned and walked away. Elias followed, his footsteps steady behind hers. That night, the city was still recovering. Small fires glowed in the distance, the scent of cooked rations drifting from makeshift kitchens set up for the displaced. Vora sat with the child on the steps of a quiet building. Sharing a small loaf of bread, the child spoke softly, telling her about the village they had lost, about the parents they could barely remember. Vora listened without interrupting. When the story was done, she said, "You are safe now." The child leaned against her arm. "You're my mother now." The word struck her deeper than any blade. No one had ever called her that before, for so long. The word mother had been used against her as a title she could never earn. But here, from this small voice, it was not a demand, not a judgment. It was a choice, her choice. She placed a hand gently on the child's back. "Yes," she said, "I am." The next morning, Elias found her in the courtyard, teaching the child how to hold a wooden staff. The child's hands were small, their stance unsteady, but their eyes were focused. Elias leaned against a wall, watching quietly. "You're staying," he said, not as a question, but as a fact. Vora glanced at him. For now, he smiled faintly. "Then I'll stay too." Oh. She raised an eyebrow. "Don't you have orders?" "I do," he said, "but I also have priorities." In the days that followed, Vora began to take on a new role in the city. Not as part of the council, but as a guardian for those who had no one else. She organized safe spaces for children, helped rebuild damaged homes, and taught others how to defend themselves. Some in the city still looked at her with old habits of judgment, but more and more began to greet her with respect. The child was never far from her side, following her through the busy streets, laughing when Elias told them stories of strange worlds beyond the stars. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the plains in gold and red, Vora stood on the outer wall of the city. Elias joined her, his hands resting on the railing. "You've changed this place," he said. She shook her head. "I've just shown them something they didn't want to see. And what's that?" "That strength is more than what you can carry," she said, glancing toward the child chasing a ball in the courtyard below. "It's what you can protect." Elias was quiet for a moment, then said, "So what now, Guardian Vora?" She allowed herself a small smile. "Now, I make sure she grows up in a world where no one can tell her she's worth less." They stood together as the first stars appeared in the sky. The air was cool, the sounds of the city softer now. Vora thought about the journey that had brought her here, the exile, the wandering, the pirates, the rescue, the choice, the battle. She thought about the people who had turned her away and how little that mattered now. The child's laughter drifted up to her, bright against the quiet evening. Elias glanced at her. "You've found your place," he said. She looked out over the plains, the pendant at her neck catching the last light of the sun. "No," she said softly. "I made it." The council had cast her out. But she had returned, not as the broken outcast they remembered. She had returned as a protector, a leader, a mother by her own choosing. And as the night settled over the city, Vora knew that whatever storms came next, she would face them. The same way she faced the last, with her shield in hand and her family at her side.